Hi, welcome back. So I've spoken a lot about how gacha players have toxic love-hate relationships with their favorite games. That's basically a line in almost every one of my recent videos. In this video, I want to explore that a little further. While some games on these lists that I make are always high up and appreciated by every single player who talks about them, other games not so much. So I'm going to take some of these games that I always talk about on my channel, including a few new ones that I haven't spoken about in depth on this channel before, and then I'm going to put them on a list based on how much they are hated by both their community and, where applicable, the overall opinion of the internet as well, just to add fuel to the fire. Now, just as a heads up, I was gonna make this a one-part video with the second half reserved for the most loved gacha games, but the video just got way too long, so I ended up deciding to split it into two parts. The next part will come in a few days, so be on the lookout for that. Before we start with this one though, just make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Red Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with. We are getting closer to 10,000 subs. When we do reach that milestone, I will be doing a big giveaway, so make sure to subscribe, and also, again, join the Express Red Discord server, which will be included in the giveaway rules. Now let's get on to it. So like I said, I've gathered a list of games, and alongside the usual few that I mention in my videos, due to just having knowledge and experience with them, I've added some extra games that were recommended by you guys. A couple of them will be mentioned just for this video because they're extreme cases, while others will continue to be mentioned in later videos, including Limbus Company and Epic 7. The way these two videos will work is I will first talk about the most hated games in this video, which are in order, where the number one game is going to be the least hated because it has the least reason to be hated. Then I will switch gears and talk about the most loved games in the next part, which every game on that list will have a community with a pretty positive opinion about it in the end. Also, just as a final message, hate is a very strong word. If a gacha game is making money, it's loved by somebody at least. This is all just for entertainment and also not to actually add any fuel to any fire, even though I did joke about that earlier. So with that out of the way, grab some popcorn, strap in, and let's get started already. So, to start with our most hated gachas list, we've got a game that started quite a big drama a couple months ago, with the usual suspects of company greed failing to meet player expectations and completely losing the trust of basically your entire player base. So most of the information here is already available on Mugen's video about this situation, but since that's 40 minutes long, let me give you the short version. Infinity Nikki was a very popular game before this whole drama happened. It reached 10 million downloads across multiple platforms, and each one of those players was incredibly positive about the game. However, things started going wrong when Nikki was preparing for a Steam launch, and they basically tried scamming their players out of a wishlist reward, completely changing up the rewards after their wishlist goal was reached. That obviously went wrong, and they ended up still giving out the previously announced rewards after some backlash. While players were definitely going to look past that, things kept going wrong, with the developers for this game making so many terrible and greedy decisions for this game that it even affected the ratings of their other games, including Love and Deep Space. These mistakes ranged from completely retconning the story, from what used to be a story loved by the entire player base, to basically something that confused everybody who played the previous story, and even made some beloved character stories absolutely make no sense in the new timeline. The greediness also started to ramp up when not only did they introduce new outfits with 11 piece sets instead of the usual 10, which you have to gacha for individually by the way, reducing the rotation frequency of the endgame content, which means players got less gacha currency, changing up the entire new die system from being completely F2P accessible to becoming almost completely paid, and also making more desirable outfit pieces like hairstyles more than twice as rare as the other less desirable ones. Also, the 1.5 update had a shitload of bugs. While Nikki seems to be recovering from this whole fiasco, with not only both its rating on Google Play Store going from 1.8 after the drama to its current 2.8, and its Steam rating going from overwhelmingly negative to mostly negative, but also Infold's other games' Love and Deep Space rating also going back up. It also recovered financially, proving one theory that gacha players really don't give a shit what you do to them. Next up, we've got Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade. Gacha games based off of anime IPs are always incredibly messy. The biggest example of this which has been fixed is Fate Grand Order, which started off as probably the most blatant cash grab of all time, trying to capitalize upon the Fate IP with a terribly developed game, insanely gacha rates and no pity system, although today, FGO's thriving is one of the most successful and most loved anime gacha games of all time, having fixed most if not all of the issues that its player base complained about when it first launched, and even started giving out free 5-star servants yearly. They actually fixed so much that, because it launched in Japan at first, its global launch was met with a lot of positivity because global players just never experienced any of the issues JP players have. And maybe the only thing that came pretty late was the pity system, arriving 4 years after the global launch. Although this is about JJK Phantom Parade and not Fate Grand Order. It is no coincidence I'm talking about FGO though, because Phantom Parade also started off as one of the most blatant cash grabs trying to capitalize upon its IP of all time. It also started off as a terribly developed, greedy mess, but there's an added bonus here that made players hate the game even more. So to start off, the game had very little content when it first launched, with some players reporting starting multiple accounts just to keep playing the game, and even then quickly running out of actual things to do, like story quests and events. When it first launched in global, it didn't have proper endgame content, making the game feel even more boring and entirely pointless. The gacha system was also pretty bad, with you not only having to pull on characters with a 0.7% rate for limited SSRs, but also memories, which are used to buff characters, and even though they have a much higher rate of 5%, the system still felt pretty bad for most players. Now there is a pity system, but that pity only comes after 250 pulls, and the amount of free cubes, which is the currency you use to actually gamble in this game, you get by being fully F2P is pretty damn low compared to that, with most players agreeing upon needing to save for around 6 months to guarantee an SSR unit, which comes out to 12,500 cubes every month, which is honestly really low compared to the pity and gacha system, further cementing how much of a cash grab this game is supposed to be. There are also quite a few greedy practices when it comes to the gacha system, not only giving paying players basically triple the pulls when using paid currency, but also having rerun banners only accessible through paid currency. Now this is all pretty bad already, but they also started accelerating updates to catch up with the JP version. Even with the patch acceleration, there was still a lack of rewards, and there were even more limited character banners, and it all just ended up being a complete mess. Now in the next video there will be another game that also did patch merging to catch up with another version, but it's on the most loved list because it actually did patch merging correctly. Maybe JJK Phantom Parade will get better when they finally do reach the same update schedule as the JP version, but for now, this game is losing revenue almost every single month, which is definitely a feat. Even Infinity Nikki started picking things back up. Things are shaky for JJK Phantom Parade. However, the following games on this list have a much more cemented fanbase, and while there is a ton of drama and hate surrounding those two next games, they are still simultaneously some of the most popular gacha games of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. Now we'll be talking about these two separately, but since they are so popular, I am sure I will be getting players defending these two games. I mean, they're still constant chart toppers, and make basically the most amount of money in this video, and definitely more than even any other game on the most loved list. They are no doubt successful, and I'm only talking about the drama and general player dissatisfaction surrounding these two games. So let's start with Genshin Impact. Since this is in order, I do feel like Genshin Impact definitely has much more dissatisfaction around it, because it has been brewing for so long, while Honkai Star Rail is just a much younger game. So Genshin Impact obviously is the highest grossing gacha game of all time. It started off as one of the best gacha games players have ever seen, being not only pretty unique in the gacha space, but also seemingly having a pretty high budget compared to other games. To start with why this game is so hated, because of how much drama has surrounded this game over the years, from creators constantly clashing over and over again to Genshin players attacking other games constantly, including Honkai Star Rail, as well as others like Wuthering Waves. Some even tried to completely take WoW off the market because they are so insecure about their game, and other incidents like actual bomb threats and torturing cats. And this basically ended up giving Genshin players one of the worst reputations on the internet. So it's safe to say that the game's reputation, or at the very least its player base's reputation, has always been in the dirt. So let's talk about what makes the actual game itself hated by its own current or former player base. I mean, just as a side note, I have a theory that half of Wuthering Waves' current player base is just people who were fed up by Genshin Impact and went to play an actually well-made product. So while the game was made on what seems to be an incredibly solid foundation, from a well-built 3D art style that showed a lot of promise when it came to animations and well-built visuals, to a decent movement system around the open world, to what seemed to be a pretty decently expandable combat system. Although this was quickly proven wrong, as the devs for this game seemed to not only hate listening to the player base, but also just hate the idea of expanding upon what they built and making it better. Complaints about the game started a really long time ago, and they first stemmed from the game having very little or otherwise just boring content. Story quests were pretty badly made despite how much money the game made monthly, taking hours and hours while being just constant dialogue or otherwise being pretty boring. Another from big events also just being yapfests. Smaller events always felt kinda pointless and felt like they just didn't mean much to the game. A while ago, the Abyss was the only piece of endgame content, and for like 3.5 years that stayed true. Meta players had only one thing to enjoy, and that was log in once every 2 weeks and do some combat, that while it seemed exciting at the start, quickly became boring and started feeling more like a game of rock, paper, scissors. Now, while there are other pieces of endgame content, the general perception of Genshin's endgame is that it's pretty goddamn boring, with all 3 modes having the same concept of complete this before the timer ends. The Abyss is just the bland one, Imaginarium Theater is the one that forces you to build way too many characters and restricts other characters, and Stygian Onslaught is just
It's the biggest
bad.
piece of dog shit.
Power creep and HP inflation also started becoming a problem ever since a couple months ago, which means that the game's massively casual player base is having an even harder time with the endgame content. And now the combat went from a game of rock, paper, scissors to, do you have the newest unit or not? Finally, Natlan is also one of the most hated nations in the game. A lot of the character designs are really disliked. For example, even though Mavrika is smoking hot, her design really doesn't fit the game, and the overall story of Natlan is disliked by a lot of people, because it never really felt like a nation of war, more like the nation of the power of friendship and DJs for some reason. Other than that, the game is also just pretty damn greedy, with the double Mavrika Sitlali banner being one of the biggest examples, as well as just not being very F2P friendly, and not giving enough ways for players to get pulls by doing content. Now obviously, it's no secret that I really don't like Genshin Impact, and the Rock doesn't either.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
But I do think that the next region, Note Cry, does seem to have a lot of promise, and for the sake of everybody who does still play Genshin Impact and genuinely just wants people to like their game, I do wish for the devs to pull up their big boy pants and actually make some good content in Note Cry. After all, I have a C3 Ganyu, and if I could have enough reason to go back to the game just to see 6her, I wouldn't be angry. Although, she'll still probably be useless in the endgame content because of Skirk. Now, it's also no secret that I think Honkai Star Rail is another biggest piece of dog shit, because it used to be my favorite gacha game, and now I'm just disappointed with everything they're doing. Well, basically, everything making Genshin players mad is the same thing making Honkai Star Rail players mad. Although HSR players are a lot more happy with their game's current state than Genshin players, because of all the character buffs going on right now and because 3.3 and 3.4 actually having a decently told story. Although there are still so many problems with this game that a lot of players are still complaining about, and there are still many things that have disappointed players even in 3.4. The biggest one is obviously the Fate collab having an incredibly boring and unimpressive story, mostly because it's told very lazily and also just because the entire story itself felt very useless. The event gameplay itself is also just another version of the Divergent universe, basically. Speaking of events, they also have been getting a lot more boring. The last actually enjoyable event was probably the War Dance, and ever since then, no event has been memorable, at least not for the right reasons. And these two issues are, of course, alongside the still rampant power creep, lack of 4-star units, and predatory practices. A lot of players especially felt that the recent character buffs, and no doubt the ones coming in the future, were just to sell new characters. If that is or isn't true doesn't really matter, because that's what players feel. Now, just like with Genshin and Not Cry, I also feel like Honkai Star Rail has the potential to completely reinvent itself in 4.0. They showed that they had the complete capability to make an engaging, well-told story in 3.3 and 3.4, so doing it in 4.0 is definitely possible. But 4.0 is especially important as well because of power creep and HP inflation. They have the chance to actually listen to the player base and add a power ceiling in 4.0, and basically stop all the power creep going on. And if they do, Honkai Star Rail will return to being one of the best gacha games, honestly, even if they don't fix most of the other issues. If 4.0 fixes power creep, I will go back to Honkai Star Rail and E6 Evernight March 7th, but that's probably not gonna happen. Right, now we're up to the final game on this list, Dragon Ball Legends. Now, of course, this game is the least hated on this list, despite me basically shitting on the game every single time I make one of these videos. I mean, out of every single comment related to Dragon Ball Legends on my channel, 95% of them are shitting on the game. The hate for this game comes from its own community, with low rates, no pity system for Ultra units, and a pretty unfair pity system for LF units. Players also complain frequently about power creep, and some characters have incredibly powerful dupes that they almost become reliant on, especially in the PvP content. Free-to-play PvP players also struggle to get a lot of things done in the PvP parts of the game, again because of all those powerful character dupes and power creep the whales are definitely getting their hands on. Now these might all sound pretty bad, especially to any disgruntled Genshin and HSR players, but the reason DBL players aren't as outraged about this as other game player bases seem to be is because DBL never really disappointed anybody. The game has always been like this, and anybody who didn't like it didn't stick around. It's not like Genshin where it used to be a power creep safe haven, and then became worse, and it's not like HSR where things went so wrong so quickly. Dragon Ball Legends knows its player base, and despite the people who quit really hating it, and despite a lot of current players still having a lot of qualms about it, it's still a pretty popular game. Aside from those issues, there's really not much to hate the game for. The story is great and the combat is incredibly well made. If you're willing to put up with these things, which a lot of Dragon Ball fans, surprisingly, based on how well the game seems to be doing basically all the time, are willing to put up with all of this, then the game is pretty enjoyable. I mean, in defense of this game, there's still a lot of skill involved in the game, and even a completely free-to-play player can still get pretty lucky with their units and also become pretty skilled at the game. Otherwise, there are still people who enjoy wailing on this game, despite the very shafty gacha system. Otherwise, if you don't enjoy it, you could still go play Dokkan Battle instead, but then you're literally just playing Dragon Ball themed Candy Crush. Pick your poison, I guess. Dragon Ball themed Candy Crush or Dragon Ball pay to win hell. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed making this video. The research on the new games was pretty fun to do. Make sure to remember to check out the next video about the most loved gacha games, which will also include more games I haven't talked about before. Other than that, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Expression Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.